Hi, my name is Ann Poirier, and I am a certified intuitive eating counselor, as well as a body neutrality and body image coach. And welcome to Say No to Diets and Yes to Possibilities. So I'm going to share some information about why diets don't work, a little bit of the physiology, because on my own extensive dieting history, the biggest thing that I did for myself was to say no to diets. I'll never go on a diet again. So I'm going to share this with you. If you have questions, please message me with any questions. I do have a little question slide at the end, so feel free to ask me anything, and I'll be happy to answer you around any of this information. So I am going to share screen with you. And then I am going to pop out of the corner so that it doesn't create any kind of distraction for you. So I'm going to talk about this saying no to diets and yes to possibilities. And so before we even get started, think about your own dieting history, because I think that there's a lot we can learn from our own dieting history. So I'm going to ask you a question, and all I want you to do is just get a sense of what happens when I ask you this question. What do you feel like? What goes on in your body? So, second. What happens when you think about stepping on a scale? Are there words? Are there phrases? What happens to your body? What thoughts come up? Phrases, words, whose voice? Is it a particular person's voice? Is it angry or sad or frustrated? So just noticing for yourself, what is it that pops up into your head when you think about stepping on a scale? The interesting thing is when we step on a scale, we have two different main thoughts. One that creates kind of this smiley face feeling, and the other one that creates this sad face feeling, right? And what happens when we dive a little deeper? With this happy face feeling, there's a couple of different behaviors that get connected. Like, hey, I'm doing so quote unquote good, I should reward myself. There's a tendency to reward ourselves with food, right? And then the other thought, oh, I need to keep going. I need to keep restricting. There's almost a panic feeling like, how am I going to keep this up? And what's it going to cost me to keep this up? So there's a couple of different main behaviors that come from the thoughts of stepping on a scale and seeing a number that creates this more of a happier feeling inside. And then when we think about the sad face, so we step on the scale and it shares a number that, ugh, there might be anger and frustration or just failure feelings. That's it. I start my diet tomorrow. I can't do this anymore, or nothing matters anyway. Might as well just eat. Nothing I do matters. Anything that I try doesn't work. I've been so quote unquote good and it doesn't work anyway. And so it's interesting. It's just an interesting thought to think about when we step on a scale. Is there a behavior attached to it? That's one of the main questions. If you think about stepping on the scale and it causes a reactional emotion inside, that's a sign that getting rid of a scale would be a really important part of this recovery from disordered eating or emotional eating or binge eating, or on the other side, restriction, compulsive exercise, or other types of things that we use to control how we look or how we are perceived. So thinking about that as well. The truth is, and this is really coming out a lot more now, the truth about dieting and restriction. And when I say diet, I mean, we are eating in a way to change our body. We're looking for an outcome that is a shift in our what our body looks like due to the fact that we, 91% of women, are unhappy with their bodies. And if we don't like what we see in the mirror, we don't like our bodies, the one thing that we've always been told is if you go on a diet, then everything will be better. Everything will work. And the problem is that they don't. They may work temporary, but they don't. There are very few studies that track people after 1 year of being on a diet. They track for a year and then they stop tracking. And that's where the weight gain happens in the biggest proportions. So 91% of women are unhappy with their bodies. 81% of 10-year-olds are afraid of being fat. 10-year-olds as fifth grade, fourth and fifth grade. The average woman spends 17 years of her life dieting. Think about that, 17 years, 365 days a year, 17 years of restriction, of a moodiness, of crankiness, of depriving, of never feeling good enough, of saying no to things, missing out on things, right? In this diet industry, it just went up here in 2022 to a $78 billion a year industry for something that has a 95% failure rate. What are some of the physiological responses to restriction? Because this kind of makes complete sense to why we have this 95% failure rate. One is there is an increase in cortisol. Cortisol is the hormone that is delivered due to stress. And think feast or famine, it signals the body to store fat. So if I am stressed out due to the fact that I'm on a diet, or my body is in stress due to the fact that I do not have enough energy to do the things that my body wants to do, it becomes stressed. So if we restrict our food, the body feels scared and threatened. Thus, the cortisol kicks up. It feels internal stress. When we have high levels of stress, the body actually stores and holds onto fat. It's part of its protection mechanism. So back during feast and famine days, hunter-gatherers, they would feast on food and then there'd be a long period of time before they ate again. So the body helped us out by creating this stress hormone cortisol that helped preserve us so that we could make it through these periods of time of famine. And the interesting thing is now food is all around us. So we don't have these periods of time of famine, but we still get spikes of cortisol. So we have this cortisol spike that wants the body to hold on to food. The other is a hormone ghrelin. Our hormone ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone, increases. So now all of a sudden I'm getting hungrier because the body doesn't have what it needs. And it says, feed me, I'm hungry, please feed me. So we have the physiological response of cortisol. We have this increase kick of hunger. And then we have this decreased drop of the hormone leptin. So they did a study at The Biggest Loser about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, where they tested the contestants prior to going on The Biggest Loser. They tested their leptin levels. Everyone had normal leptin levels. At the end of their time on the ranch, they tested their leptin again, and they had almost no leptin at all, which meant that anytime they ate, there was never a signal to the brain that they were full. They were always hungry. If you think about not eating all day and then going home and having one thing and then still feeling hungry and another thing and still feeling hungry, because the leptin levels have decreased. So thinking about that as well. And then What about the brain? Have you ever thought about where your brain goes when you're on a diet or when you are restricting? It's always thinking about food. So the brain doesn't shut down. So we have these four physiological responses actually working against us when it comes to dieting and restriction and weight loss. The other thing that this is, you may have heard of this, is called the Key Study. It was done in 1944 and 45. They would never be able to do this study again now because of laws and rules, but they took 40 men and tested them psychologically. They tested them physiologically. They tested their emotions. So they were fully tested and healthy men between the ages of 18 and 24, I believe. And they cut their caloric energy intake in half for 6 months. Now, take a look at what happened. There was only 36 men that actually finished the study. 4 men dropped out. Decrease in metabolic rate, 40% decrease in metabolic rate, which means as soon as they start to eat, their body's slower. So it takes that much less food to keep them full that the body is ready for. Increased episodes of depression and emotional distress. It sounds like the way it feels when we're on a restricted eating plan. Increase in food cravings, social isolation and withdrawal. Think about when you don't feel good in your body, where you don't want to go out, you don't want to do things, you say no more. Cold all the time, lack of focus, couldn't concentrate, preoccupation with food, binging and purging, and lack of sexual interest in a man's sexual interest prime, basically. So in 1944 to 1945, they saw these responses to restriction, yet never really publicized enough so that people would understand that actually this restriction doesn't work. And it's worse and worse and worse as time goes on. So it's really no wonder that we're always we're always searching for something because it's all around us. It's on the media, our social media channels all over the place. You can't go to the grocery store and buy something without seeing all of this stuff on the sidelines, all the different magazines, and all the different titles. You can't go to a restaurant without hearing some people in the area talking about food or talking about weight or talking about good foods and bad foods. And there is another way. So, thinking about asking yourself the question, why continue to do something that I know doesn't work for me? It may work short term, but it doesn't work in the long run. And that's the definition of insanity, to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect different results. If 95% of dieting fails, we gain the weight back. Two-thirds of that, two-thirds of those people gain more weight back. What's your history? And then how much brain space does it take up to be on or even off a diet and feeling the feelings of guilt and shame that kick in on both sides? And then the amount of time, time thinking about food or worrying about food or preparing food or thinking about exercise or moving your body, right? So there's brain space, there's time, there's energy. All that takes energy, and there's money, lots of money over and over and over again for the same thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about knowing that we have another way. And these are some of the things about hitting dieting rock bottom that I think would be really interesting for you to understand and see if you ever were here, or if this is where you are now, or if you're like, oh yeah, I remember that time. And I'm so glad I shifted and started something new. Attempts to losing weight and ending up gaining it back. Tired of placing value on the number on the scale. Remember that very first couple of slides, thinking your worth is tied to your weight. You think and worry about weight and food all the time. You think you should or should not when it comes to food and eating, or I was really good today, I was really bad today, quote unquote. You define it, and it defines a value, your worth. I was bad versus these a different way of seeing all of this, and really separating goods and bads away from food. You dread foods you love because when you eat them, you feel guilty and shameful. You don't like the way you look and feel in your body. You eat to numb or discomfort, or your life has been clouded by obsessive thinking about food. This is hitting dieting rock bottom. This is where you say, am I continuing? You go back here, right? Am I continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, but ending up getting the same results? The good news is there is another way. And it is making a courageous and brave decision to say, I'm done. Enough. I have decided to never go on a diet that has a 95% failure rate again, period. And saying yes to this possibility of freedom with food through intuitive eating. Instead of looking externally, looking outside, seeing what's out there in order to tell you what you need, stop and turn inward. Listen inside. Listen to your body. It's smarter than you think. Your body, not anybody else's body, yours, because we are all so different. So something that might have quote unquote worked for someone else doesn't always work for other people because their body is different, right? So I want to talk about just a few of the principles of intuitive eating here to just kind of start this moving forward a little bit. And the first one is this understanding of hunger and fullness. We get disconnected from hunger and fullness really early in our lives. If you think about being about this age of these kids right here, that if you're hungry and you ask your mom or your dad or your caregiver an hour before dinner, I'm hungry, can I have something to eat? The caregiver usually says, well, I don't want you to spoil your dinner, so hold off. We're going to have dinner in an hour. You don't need anything to eat. So we're shutting down hunger there. And then at dinner time, when we're eating and we're halfway through and we're full, like my body says I'm full, and we stop eating, the caregiver shifts and says, finish your plate, right? So we get disconnected from what true hunger and true fullness feels like. And that's what we're trying to reconnect with. What does hunger feel like in your body? Do you know? What are the emotional and the physical signs of hunger for you? Nobody else, but for you. And what does it feel like for you to be comfortably full? Like a fullness that is comfortable, a fullness that doesn't make you tired or doesn't upset your stomach or doesn't make you want to go to sleep right away. What is comfortable fullness for you? So it's this combination of understanding and learning our hunger, and at the same time, trying to understand and feel our fullness. Like, what does it feel like for me to be full? We have, we use a hunger scale and a 1 on one side and a 10 on the other side. And 1 is ravenous and 10 is really overfull, and for many of us, and I use the word us and we a lot because I've walked to this journey. We know the two ends of the scale, but we know very little about the middle of the scale. What does a 3 feel like? What does a 4 feel like? What does a 7 or an 8 feel like? So understanding our own bodies and having patience and curiosity as we walk that journey. So two of the main points of intuitive eating are really trying to tie into you and your hunger and your fullness and becoming aware of your own eating. When do you eat? Why do you eat? How do you eat? What do you eat? Who are you with? Right? Starting to just become aware of your eating, because that makes a big difference. Do we find ourselves overeating or undereating around certain people or in different places? Or do we eat fast? Do we eat slow? Why do we eat? Are we hungry, or do we have to? Like, what are some of the things that just becoming aware of your own eating patterns? When you come aware of your own eating patterns, there's something else that we really want to consider here, and that's called satisfaction. So here's the example. You go to a restaurant, and all the restaurants now have these not all of them, but many of them have calorie counts on them. And if you've been a chronic dieter, a yo-yo dieter, or a disordered eater, or have had an eating disorder, this kind of thing can be really disturbing. If you're at a restaurant and you're looking at a menu and you know that you are physically feeling hungry, you're ready to eat something, there's usually something that pops out that says, oh, that sounds really good. That sounds delicious. I would love to have that. And then there's something else that usually pops out that is a should, like I really should have that. And that could have to do with those numbers. It could have to do with the rights and the wrongs and the goods and the bads in your head, the all or nothing thinking. It could have to do with a lot of your own beliefs and behaviors around food and eating. But there's this space in between looking at the menu and trying to decide and automatically going to one thing or another, just breathing into it and allowing yourself to say, what is going to make me feel satisfied? How will I feel after I eat this meal? What does it look like after I eat this meal? Because what happens is if we eat the food that we think we should eat, it usually, especially if there's something else that you really want, it's usually not satisfying. And what happens with that is when you get home, you're still not satisfied. Even though you're physically not hungry anymore, you might forage for food for that specific satiety and feel satisfied with the food that you ate. On the flip side, when you choose something that is exactly what you want, you're like, oh, that I haven't had that in a long time, or the last time I had that, it was so good. And you eat what your body wants and what you want. When you get home, there's much less thought of food or foraging for food because your body is satisfied. So understanding this nuance of satisfaction in choosing foods that satisfy you emotionally and physically. And so moving on, I've got one more here that I'm going to talk to you about when it comes to intuitive eating. There are 5 more principles, by the way, but I'm just touching on these for right now. And one is about emotional eating and our emotional triggers, right? And so this is a great acronym you can keep in the back of your head. We usually eat because of we're in one of these places. Hungry, right? I'm hungry, so I'm going to choose food. Angry, frustrated, anxious. Lonely can be sad and depressed. Tired, exhausted, way too busy, hustle culture, overloaded, overwhelmed, bored, nothing to do, might as well eat, or stressed, worried and fearful. So knowing your own emotional triggers can help you develop a new kind of toolbox for what you might do instead of food or in connection with food. So here's a story. I'm going to stop share for a second and come back to you. Here's a story when you think about eating due to emotions, right? You get in a big fight at work, you're driving home, all you can think about is the ice cream in the freezer, and you're angry and frustrated, and you're driving home, and the next thing you know, before you really even know it, you're sitting on the couch or you're standing in the kitchen and you're hitting the bottom of the ice cream carton. Then all of a sudden a wave of guilt or shame rush over you. And then you're in this place of panic. So not only did you feel this anger and frustration, now you're feeling sad, shameful, embarrassed, maybe, humiliated, maybe, depressed, maybe, lots of different feelings. And where does that take you? What behaviors does that send you down? So if we rewind and we're coming home and we're thinking about how angry we are, and we're thinking about the ice cream, and when we get home, there is a space and a place where we stop and we breathe and say, what's the feeling? What do I need right now? I am so angry. I can't believe that happened. Why did they do that? The brain's going, it could be really helpful if I called my friend Georgia and let it out, vented to a friend. Maybe I'll just take a shower. Maybe I'll take the dog for a walk. Maybe I'll go journal this all out, or write up, a letter that I won't send to whoever got me angry, journal it out. So there's things that we can do that help take care of some of the need. I'm angry. I'm going to call Georgia and vent. I'm going to take a shower. Then I'm going to go into the refrigerator or freezer, get a bowl, take some ice cream out, put it in the bowl, sit comfortably on the couch or at the table, and enjoy my ice cream. End of story. Without any shame or guilt, with just knowing that whole process will help relieve the stress without the emotional attachment to eating. We sometimes emotionally eat. How can we really be aware of when we are turning towards that, and what is the need, and can we do something to help the need? Sometimes it's without food. Sometimes it might be with food, but with food in a completely different, conscious, mindful way. So let's head back. Stop. Head back in here. All right. Now pop me off. So knowing your emotional triggers, and then thinking about food. So we're shifting your perspective around food. Food is for fuel and food is for pleasure. How can we really start to shift our beliefs around food so that we understand it's for these two things: to fuel our bodies to do what we want to do, and to enjoy ourselves with friends and family and others? Isn't it time, right, to really release some of these things? Release feeling deprived. Release that guilt and shame. Release feeling tired and hungry, overly emotional, snappy, hangry. Release the obsessive thinking and the withdrawal and the isolation and the saying no and not going out and missing out on experiences. Release the being short-tempered and self-critical, and the feelings of failure that lead to that loneliness, sadness, and depression. And there is that other choice. Saying no to diets was the best decision I ever made, period. So think about the possibilities for you when you say yes to yourself. It might look like, right, enjoying friends and family for dinner and outings without all that stress or shame or guilt or any of those other pieces. Choosing to eat foods that you love, feeling more comfortable and confident in your body, really building a relationship with your body, taking pictures, creating memories, stopping to smell the roses, so to say, right? Um, Enjoying foods, both alone and with others, having more energy, new experiences and challenges, saying yes to things, and feeling more empowered to make different choices. And by making these different choices, you get to make a difference and become a happy, healthy role model for our next generation, which is probably the most important thing that we can do. So it's your turn. Here's where you get to say, well, what's my choice? Where do I want to take my next year? How do I want to live my next year? What is this? What is it going to look like for me? What's my choice? Can I step all in to an intuitive eating journey and tune into me and start to learn about me and myself and my food needs and my energy needs and my emotional needs and my physical needs? So this is kind of just a shared story, not story, a shared experience for you where you get to see the physiological effects of dieting, because I think for me, I know it helped me to realize, but I was angry. Why didn't anybody tell me these things before? Why didn't I know that my body was actually trying to fight me when it came to trying to lose weight and change my body and make it look a certain way? And I'll tell you something, it didn't matter what I weighed. It never was good enough. I never felt good enough. I was always beating myself up. So thinking about your journey and how do you want to step towards your future and what does it look like for you? I know I have had privileges for sure in this life. I also know I have had severe disordered eating, body dysmorphia, depression, anxiety, eating disorders. I have overcome two, or just one long one. One long eating disorder really is more like it. But to step away and start to say yes to you and to clear out some of the brain space so that your qualities, your talents, your gifts can come out and you can show up as the wonderful you that you are without all this constant self negative talk and always worrying and shame and guilt and frustration and embarrassment and humiliation and all the things that we take on, criticism, judgment, comparison. Saying no, this is me, and I'm trying to figure out what I need. What are my needs? What's the best way for me to treat my body? And it can start with intuitive eating and tuning in to yourself, your hunger, your fullness, your satisfaction, your emotions. All of that is the road, and rejecting society's thin ideal and rejecting diet culture. Let's not give them any more money. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging in here. And again, my name's Ann Poirier, and I will see you on the other side.